I suppose it's a theme of many a disaster novel, the concept of perpetual night. Even movies have been crafted around the idea. The alarm clock goes off. A tired man stumbles to the shower. Breakfast downstairs comes next. But upon turning the corner and stepping into the kitchen, he notices an anomaly for the first time. For whatever reason, it's still dark outside. At first, he assumes his alarm sounded an hour early. It didn't. After checking the time, he wonders if it's storming outside or especially overcast. It's not. A checklist of scenarios races through his mind as curiosity takes hold, but that curiosity turns into fear as the reality creeps up on him, slowly setting in as he realizes that something is deeply wrong with the world outside his home. That is the framework of a perfect modern story of the apocalypse, one we all could imagine ourselves living. But it's just one framework of an infinite number that are possible, and the one I unearthed today is uniquely different. The darkness is not caused by a shielding of the sun, moon, or stars, but by the absence of these altogether. The darkness is impenetrable, unbroken by any celestial body. And more curiously, it comes and goes 1 year at a time. It is best equated with the seasons, embracing the world as a part of accepted nature. And for the people within it, they prove that their society could not only survive the unending night, they could get used to it, they could continue to live. In this tale, the night is not a disaster, but a part of life that is standard, fully expected, and yet still not understood. It is not treated as an apocalypse, but remains an irreparable situation forced upon the people. The year-long night. To be elected the new bishop was a horror he never could have anticipated, yet it was thrust upon him due to matters outside his control. The previous bishop of Moonglow was dead, and the circumstances in which he was found were as bewildering as they were predictable. The body was discovered with wide-open black eyes, lying flat while suspended mid-air, floating above its bed, while a mark in the shape of an eye was burned onto its bare chest. Every 2 years the same thing happened. The bishop was killed under the same set of circumstances, no matter how he tried to outrun or hide from it, and every 2 years the bishop was replaced. Strange as it was, it coincided with another biannual change in the forest-engulfed town of Moonglow, the sudden shift from day to night. At the climax of the bishop's 2nd year, when the sun was highest in the sky, the light would suddenly vanish. The sun would be taken away seemingly without cause or reason in the blink of an eye, leaving the walled town of Moonglow in a state of pure, blinding darkness. Torches were lit outside every doorstep. Candles were a thriving business in the town, and one of its greatest sources of revenue for trade elsewhere. And, in response to the lasting pitch black, they created the Wisp, a cord of magical energy that flowed above the streets and alleys, forming a snake-like source of dim light that reached most of the town. It branched from the center, where the source was located, Maintaining this required constant attention from the mages, and as a result, full blackouts would occur from time to time, leaving the town in a state of nearly impenetrable darkness for brief periods. On the same night as the 2-year cycle began its repetition, the bishop would be found deceased, floating above his bed with black eyes and the symbol of a third eye on his chest. This is simply how it worked, and no one understood why. A new bishop would be selected via raffle, for if no one dwelled inside the town's keep as leader, the consequences would be far worse for the people of Moonglow, almost as if the ground upon which the town sat was angry, hungry. People would vanish during the night and never return. Children would go missing. One minute a family could be sitting by the fire, telling stories to pass the time, and the next they would all cease to exist. For this reason, no one protested the election of another bishop, for if anyone was to be sacrificed to the night, it was best to know who that person would be. After the town weathered a full year, the light would return in an instant as the sun reappeared. It was blinding to many, jarring to all, and yes, it came the exact moment a year had passed. This began the final stage of the bishop's life, for his service was then half over, and by the time it became dark again, he would be gone. There was also no night during this period, only sunshine, and with it came peace for the citizens of Moonglow, temporary hope for a better tomorrow, and a silence to the mysterious chaos that laughed at them from the shadows every other year. But in spite of the horrors that plagued the town, nobody could leave. The forests surrounding Moonglow were not only dense, but they carried illusions, and no matter how far one traveled amongst the trees, they would always find themselves back at the town gate as it appeared from the mist ahead of them. Every 2 years during the light, at least one person attempted their escape, and like always, be it after days or weeks, they returned. However, while observing the old bishop's funeral and standing anxiously through the cremation thereafter, Narun Pum, the new elected bishop. Now, while observing the old bishop's funeral and standing anxiously through the cremation thereafter, Narun Pum, the newly elected bishop, swore he would put an end to Moonglow's horror before his death 2 years from then. He got straight to work. The position required not only dealing with the impending doom he faced, but governing the town as well, and in the following days he spent his waking hours serving the people and studying the geography of the region, going through historical documents, land deeds, ledgers, and every record he could find that dealt with the town of Moonglow. He would walk the streets while everyone lay peacefully in their beds. He would stand on the eastern wall and glare into the forest, wondering what force held his town in its clutches, and his life alongside it. "This fear," he whispered one day while sitting alone in his study, "is this what those who came before me experienced?" After weeks, Narun decided to examine everything related to the previous bishop's death, especially as it pertained to the eye symbol left upon his chest. The marking was burned into his skin, not with fire, but with an unknown acid, and it was covered in a black film like smoke after filling a glass jar. It was dead center between the pectoral muscles, and the smell when examined by the head alchemist was putrid, like urine left festering in a bucket. With the body cremated, there was no way to examine it further, but there were detailed notes following the autopsy, just like every bishop before him, and of course, the town's archmage once again studied the magic used to suspend the bishop mid-air. Even now, the spell used is unknown, though most sorcerers could easily recreate the effect. When these reports turned up nothing, Narun sent a request beyond the town for aid in his research, which was possible thanks to a method developed many years prior that kept Moonglow alive. Though people could not leave the town, items could. Items could also be sent in. Decades prior, the citizens learned that if they sent boats down the river that passed through town, the vessels wouldn't reappear like people did when they attempted their escape through the woods. Eventually, the townspeople were shocked by the appearance of a different boat that drifted in from the opposite end of the river, and amazingly it bore messages from the outside. This gave way to trade, to letters being sent to and from the town, and to regular communication with people beyond the inescapable claws of Moonglow. However, people could not use this method to abandon the town, and if one boarded the boat as it traveled downriver, they would find themselves engulfed by a dense fog, then return to the river's eastern side, back at the start of town. Thus, Naroon wrote as many inquiries as he could, searching for a skilled sorcerer, diviner, or alchemist, to share information with and study the phenomenon from outside of Moonglow. And as luck would have it, someone heeded his call for help. Someone unexpectedly knowledgeable on the subject, who had already been studying the location for years. Roan Amadis was the man's name, and he was a skilled practitioner of magic who studied archaic enchantments from the days of old, specifically those created during the Great Starvation, as he found that those made out of necessity were the most useful. When it came to Moonglow, he believed the walled town was afflicted by some kind of residual enchantment from that era. They wrote to each other weekly, performing their own research between each set of letters. During that time, after they studied innumerable historical documents in and outside of the town, Naroon came across a single mention of an event that hinted at the idea that Roan's belief about an ancient enchantment might be legitimate. He passed the information along with a nervous but hopeful pen. 200 years before he was born, a quake took place in the region that shook Moonglow during the year-long night. Minor damages happened in town, including shattered windows at the bell tower, but very little structural damage occurred. But very little did not mean none at all. In the town square, an unused well had caved in when a sinkhole formed, swallowing 2 people who didn't make it out alive. Beneath crumpling layers of sediment and stone they perished, yet as the citizens attempted to locate and rescue them, strange lights were seen zipping through the shadows by those who delved into the open crevice. But, after 3 days of turning up nothing, they called off the search and filled in the sinkhole, proceeding to rebuild the town square when the sunlight returned. And at no point did anyone discover what the strange lights were or what caused them. In fact, there was no other record of their existence, just the one. This puzzled Naroon and Roan. What could the rescuers have seen, and where did the lights come from? Were there still open chambers below the town square, and could there exist a way to access them? Perhaps the quake caused an ancient tunnel to collapse, which in turn formed the sinkhole. If that was the case, then maybe this lent credence to the idea that Moonglow was afflicted by a long-forgotten kind of magic that remained hidden beneath it for centuries. The 2 of them immediately began a hunt. Naroon used his remaining days in the sunlight to search every corner of the town, and he typically did so after the normal waking hours of its people. He would ask if he could examine the cellars of homes, and of course he explored the temple's crypt. Even the bell tower had an underground storage room, but after brightening its shadows with the dim glow of a lantern, he found nothing within. Meanwhile, according to Roan, searching the exterior of Moonglow was a more difficult task, because from his perspective, the town didn't visibly exist. Deep in the forest was a ruined wall, overtaken by nature and the stains of old age, and it was built at the base of a mountain. The only thing of significance it held was a deep black tunnel from which a stream flowed. Over the years, after Moonglow's existence was discovered, the small village of Sunbleed formed around the wall, and even now it held less than 100 people, all of whom would not dare boat their way into the mountain. Doing so meant they'd never return. They would become citizens of a city trapped behind the mysterious veil of paradoxical space. Still, Roan remained convinced there was an entrance to the chambers beneath Moonglow tucked away in the wilderness somewhere. All he had to do was find it. For months the two of them searched where they could and wrote to each other, and when nothing changed, Naroon addressed his people, discussing his intention to locate the reason for Moonglow's exile. He asked if they would assist in searching their basement rooms and homes for a passage hidden away that might lead to a cave system below town. Thankfully, all of them complied, and many were impressed with his proactive approach to solving the issue they had dealt with for generations. During this time, Roan searched the mountains. He trekked through deep ravines where the sun scarcely touched the ground, and he climbed to the spine-like ridges to see the woodlands. Most peculiar was the fact that during this time beyond the village, he did not encounter a single animal. Many species were in low numbers already, but to not see a bird or rodent, or even the markings of a predator, was off. It didn't feel natural, and one evening, while intentionally wandering past sundown, he caught a glimpse of something strange. At the base of a short waterfall, he witnessed two strange lights, one following the other as they hovered over a slender path and disappeared behind the water. This, he thought, must have been related to the lights beneath Moonglow. How could it not? He relayed this information to Naroon, then proceeded to investigate the location the next day, but to no avail. Whatever the lights were, they left nothing behind, and there was no indication of an opening to the mountain. This was both a great discovery and a setback, and while the day period of Moonglow dwindled, neither man gave up hope as the year-long night rapidly approached. In the weeks that followed, they kept searching and studying all they could, and with the citizens' help, Naroon indeed made a discovery of his own. Behind the wooden wall of an unused cellar, there was an empty room with runic symbols scrawled on its floor in a circle. When translated and read aloud, nothing happened. Not at first. For that changed the moment night eclipsed the town of Moonglow, and for once he felt the tugging excitement of progress as the cellar beamed with light. Many people in nearby homes were awakened by the obnoxious, superheated glow that broke free of the cellar's windows, gleaming like bright blue diamonds. It outshone the wisp and its core in the center of town, and on that night, as the citizens gathered around, Naroon delved into the basement to investigate. What he found was fascinating. The runic symbols were gone, but in their place a blinding circle had appeared on the floor that radiated a soothing, mellow heat like warm water on a sunny day. Naroon reached down to touch it. And at that moment, the house was ravaged by a harsh rumble that shook the walls and furnishings upstairs, and that sent windows shattering with ear-splitting cries. The light grew even more blinding. Naroon was forced to shut his eyes, and just when he thought the house might collapse, the chaos died into silence in the blink of an eye. There was no more rumbling, no broken glass, no fearful screams from people outside. Everything paused, and while the silence found him, he heard it. A voice. It was curious, feminine, and it came to him from the circle of light. "I am waking. Find me, and I will show you the way out." The voice faded as quickly as it appeared, and immediately the mayhem continued until finally dying as well. And when all was said and done, Naroon remembered that soft, ethereal voice more clearly than his own, and he knew that they were getting closer to an escape from the town. Perhaps, if he was lucky, his premature death wasn't certain anymore. But the next day, Roan sent a letter. The message it contained was jarring, but fascinating nonetheless. A large eye had burned into the wall outside of Moonglow, and strangely enough, the people of Sunbleed could no longer leave their village. The dark magic that sealed them in was spreading. For quite some time, panic wrapped the village of Sunbleed as people realized they could no longer go beyond the natural boundary of the forest and mountain, and like Moonglow, darkness engulfed them. However, there came another chance as well, one that felt like a blessing and a curse at the same time. The river flowing through Moonglow dried up, and the town's citizens discovered that they could leave, but only if they walked through a dense fog along the riverbed. This, of course, led them to Sunbleed, where they were yet again trapped. But at the very least their territory grew, and for the first time in centuries, another piece of the world had opened up to the townspeople of a hidden and nearly forgotten city. Naturally, this gave Narun the opportunity to meet his companion in person, and though the situation was yet to be understood, they could work faster without the need to write letters. The days that followed were not easy, and while the citizens of Sunbleed first welcomed their neighbors, they soon began to resent them. After all, it was the curse over Moonglow that had spread to both towns, and a whisper of blame was pattering on the rooftops like rain, trickling into every nook and cranny as time passed. If the town was cursed, surely that had something to do with the people that lived in it. At least, that's how the people of Sunbleed began to see it. And even when the mages began extending the reach of the wisp, spreading dim light through the streets of both towns, the glow felt more ominous than secure. But Narun and Roan were not concerned with the relationship between the two locations. Not at all. Instead, they studied every waking moment, working in shifts as they set up a laboratory in the basement that contained the strange runic symbols. They attempted to translate their meaning and find their origin in history, but with limited resources, they made no progress. Therefore, they focused on other, less telling yet still valuable observations, and this brought an abundance of information to light. First, they learned that the symbols were written on a pale, greenish floor made of ascendite, a stone typically mined deep underground and exceedingly rare in the modern age. They were scrawled with a mixture of resin, coal, and ash, and based on the magic implanted therein, the structure of the spell, and the sheer quality with which it functioned, Roan surmised it was meant for worship by the peoples of old. He suggested it might have been created in the name of a deity. Perhaps it was used for rituals or sacrifice. He couldn't explain the voice Narun heard, however, and without more information, they were halted from proceeding further. In some ways. Narun used their stagnation as an opportunity to explore Sunbleed, a town he had gone his whole life without seeing. It fascinated him. The architecture was different, simpler, mostly wooden, and there were animals in the surrounding forest he had only seen in the diagrams of old books. Searching the village for answers wouldn't have taken long at all, so it came as no surprise that Roan spent his days in the mountains. Suddenly, that made Narun wonder. What about the lights at the waterfall? Was that place within their reach? He proposed this question to Roan, who admitted he had yet to attempt leaving Sunbleed in that direction, and that evening, under pure darkness, the two of them began a trek into the foggy woods. The silence was haunting, interrupted only by the sound of their footsteps crunching on the cold earth beneath them. They held torches overhead, blazing a faint trail in the shadows like a candle seen far off from a mountain. And soon, like spirits howling in the realm's distant black, they could hear pouring water. This brought them to a ravine, which led to a pool that gathered at the base of a mountain, and indeed, the waterfall. How could they wander so far from the village? How much farther could they go? Naroon remembered the words spoken to him while inside the basement with piercing blue light. "Find me, and I will show you the way out," he said. Roan raised an eyebrow, but understood the moment's significance. Whatever force trapped them in the two towns, it wanted them to come here. They lingered for quite some time, searching the area for signs of unnatural activity. They looked for more runic symbols, for masonry, and, of course, the strange lights. Yet they found nothing, not even a whisper of hope that there might be something valuable to their pursuit. However, their lack of progress did not last forever. For beneath the veil of darkness and the glow of their fiery torches, Naroon caught sight of a glimmer in the pool before them, and the longer he stared at it, the more he realized that it was not a reflection of their own lights. It was deep in the waters, hidden away at the water's lowest point. It blinked multiple times, then fluttered about, and as both men watched it in bewilderment, a decision was made. "I will meet it," Naroon said. He handed his torch to Roan. "It is my life on the line, so I will be the one to apply the most risk. Wait for me here." "Are you sure?" Roan asked. "What if this is a deception?" "Then I'll be dying sooner rather than later. Time is a luxury I lack, and if I am to survive the end of the night, I must find a way to dispel the magic burdening our towns. Success is not just my duty, it's my salvation." He removed his shirt and shoes, passed another glance to Roan, then dove into the pool. Forward motion, that's all he could afford when the clock was ticking ever on. A splash into the airless depths led him to a cold state of flux, where gravity had lost its pull as the water carried him, and once submerged, he forced himself to swim down. The light below him danced like a dream creature excited to meet its first visitor from the real world, and it lingered in the deepest section, waiting. As he drew nearer, the light slipped away, melting into the ground like water through a roof full of cracks. Yet in its memory, a symbol appeared on the dirt floor, that of an open eye. The light smoldered before it too faded into non-existence, and Naroon held his breath, awaiting further change. His patience paid off. Following a sharp flash that blinded him, his eyes peeled open to see a gaping hole beneath him in the floor, one so black and unknowable that just staring at it felt like risking his life. How did it appear? What could be down there? Far below, another light appeared, beckoning him to follow, and still on a single breath hold, he continued his journey to the depths. Upon reaching the bottom, the orb of light sifted through what could only be described as a blurry stream of water on the floor, like sheets of rain drizzling over the edge of a slanted rooftop, obscuring the view beyond them. He too passed through it. This gateway turned out to be exactly that, as, upon swimming through, Naroon found himself breaking surface tension and treading water, able to breathe again. No longer was he facing downward either. Rather, it was like the world had flipped on its head. He gasped for air and inhaled heavily, content with merely being alive as he swam to a nearby embankment. It was then that he noticed there was light. What should have been a dark, underwater cave was the opposite, and as he crawled onto a rock surface, he collected himself enough to look around. The cavern walls, its jagged ceiling, and its curving, uneven floors were wrapped in a sheet of dead grass and soil, with rotted tree trunks that acted as stalactites dangling from above, while other full-canopy trees loaded with stale leaves reached upward, trying to help their inverted friends get back to the ground. Constricting vines overcame everything, turning the space ugly as the entire chamber slowly suffocated. And, suspended in the air, were dozens of light orbs like the one he saw before. They just hung there, unmoving. Who created them? And that's when he saw it. The creature. No, it was the chrysalis in which a creature was contained, and it was torn open halfway. It floated above the underground forest, encased in the tendrils of a million plants, and like a thin curtain, its hard shell was splintered and broken off, revealing the gray-skinned arm of an unknown species within. "What is this place?" he marveled. "I've never seen anything like it." He walked amongst the trees toward the chrysalis, passing by one of the orbs of light. It hummed softly, then fluttered away from him, twirling off until it moved a safe distance. And as he drew near to the encased creature ahead, Narun heard a voice, the same feminine voice that spoke to him in the basement in Moonglow. It bore a soothing tone, like someone just awakened from a long and restful sleep. "You have found me," she said. "Thank you." Suddenly the plants began to shift, slithering in multiple directions and moving the chrysalis closer to him until he was surrounded by vines, leaves, and tree limbs on all sides, while the creature's cracked shell stood upright mere feet away from him. In the following moments, silence fell upon the chamber. "What are you?" asked Narun. The creature within the chrysalis breathed in with a sigh of peace, and as it did, a breeze whispered through the wooded cavern. "I am the forest worshipped by the people of these mountains," she said. "I once was not real, but I was shaded into existence when the world began to die. I have waited since then." Waited? He lowered his brow. Waited for what? "Not for what," she told him, "but for whom? I can see the souls of my children from below the mountain. All of you. I can see the interior of a person's heart, and what potential they have, and for thousands of years you have failed to break the cycle. Until now. You found me, and now I am almost free." Narun did his best to study the creature within the chrysalis, but despite its protective casing being transparent, it was still blurred and inadequate to expose greater details. "Why have you trapped us?" he questioned forcefully. "And why am I destined to die like every bishop before me? Leave this place. You don't need us to survive." The plants and vines curled, tightening the space around him. "I must survive. I could have taken all, but one soul is enough. Now that you are here, I will never require a sacrifice again." "What do you mean? I've done nothing to free you. You're still trapped in your own shell." "No, not anymore." The chrysalis began to crack as a black mist poured from the plants around him, and although he tried to turn and run, he couldn't. The creature had placed walls on every side. Shadows engulfed him like the night that covered Moonglow, and it became pitch black, as if he were permanently blinded. But then a face appeared. It glowed in the impenetrable darkness. It smiled. It looked more like a wooden mask than a person, and it had a mane of leaves encircling it like a luxurious cloak. And finally, as Narun waited for what came next, its eyes opened. Like liquid obsidian, they glimmered and stared far into his soul, carving out a place to reside. Vast they were, placing all who saw them into a haunting field of dark wildflowers on a starless night. And though they could flee, to escape would require running for eternity. "Thank you," she told him. "My restless sleep is over. My tossing, my turning. The darkness and the light will torment my people no more, and from now on they will be free. As will I. But for you, I am afraid the story is over." Lost in the creature's eyes, Naroon could feel his soul being broken into like a wooden door splintered by a swinging axe. He felt the strings that supported his mind break one by one as he shed ownership of his own body, and suddenly he found himself running through that infinite field of black wildflowers beyond the creature's cavernous gaze. Yet no matter where he searched or where he ran, the field stretched forever. It was obscurity. It knew only how to erase. It would never let go. And as Naroon realized the truth, he knew it was already too late for him. Not only had his life reached its end, but his body would go on with someone else in it. Roan had been waiting for more than 2 hours, and at that point, it was safe to say that Naroon wasn't coming back. Their torches would give out before long, and if that happened, making it back to Sunbleed would be next to impossible in the darkness. He would be forced to feel his way there, shouting into the nothingness as despair sank in. But then the water rippled. A second later, bubbles came up. Lastly, a gasping and exhausted man burst forth through the surface, flailing his arms toward shore while exclaiming something with excitement. "We've done it," Naroon's voice rang out. "It's over." After Naroon swam to the water's edge, Roan assisted him, hauling his tired body from the pool. The water felt like an icy hand wherever it touched skin. "Done what?" Roan asked. "What is over? And how are you alive right now? You've been gone for hours below the water." "I figured it out," answered Naroon. "We're free to come and go as we please." This seemed too unbelievable to accept, and Roan assumed his friend was delirious. "What of the darkness?" he asked. "How can we make the cycle end?" Soaked and tired, Naroon answered him, smiling in a way he'd never had before. It almost didn't seem real, like he had forgotten how to position his facial muscles for the expression. "It's only night time," Naroon said. "Look up. There are stars beyond the clouds. You and I are free from this place, at last."
You